or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. Time is ticking. Get your entry in now. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
She could have said stump.
you made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Sir Keir Starmer is set to announce he needs 10 years to make Britain better. But in just 50 days, he has already found himself mired in sleaze, with the Chancellor accused of breaking the ministerial code. But in a State of the Nation first, I will be giving the Prime Minister fashion advice, as a donor has paid for him to look beautiful. When social services claim to be underfunded, why did they waste time quizzing Kirsty Allsop for allowing her 15-year-old son to go interrailing? Labour's ideological march through the institutions begins as the poisoning of the minds of the youth starts with the challenging of whiteness in British schools. Plus, it's the 50th birthday of one of the stalwarts of the royal family, the Duke of Gloucester. I will be discussing the occasion with the top royal journalist of his generation, Robert Hardman. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, historian David Aldrich-Bolt and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As always, it's a crucial part of the programme. I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Tatiana Sanchez.
Jacob, thank you very much and good evening. The top stories. The Metropolitan Police says a person has been stabbed at Notting Hill Carnival today, resulting in non-life-threatening injuries. The force says they stopped a vehicle believed to be en route to the event as well, and the car was carrying a firearm. They arrested 2 people there. Another firearm was seized at one of the entry points into the event. They also say a man who was wanted for an attempted murder in Hackney in July was spotted at Carnival and arrested following a successful stop. Officers have made 145 arrests and seized 41 weapons so far today. 3 people were stabbed yesterday, including a 32-year-old mother who's in a serious condition in hospital. In other news, residents of an East London block of flats engulfed by what they call a nightmare fire say they've lost everything. Everyone's been accounted for and no injuries reported after a major incident was declared following the fire in Dagenham. Over 100 people were evacuated from the building, with 2 people taken to hospital. London Fire Commissioner Andy Rowe says a full investigation into the fire and its cause is now underway. He says there will undoubtedly be concerns around the fire safety issues present within the building, and this will form part of our report. A British man killed by a missile strike in eastern Ukraine has been named as safety advisor Ryan Evans. The 38-year-old was part of a reporting crew working with the news agency Reuters when the hotel they were staying at in Kramatorsk was struck on Saturday. The agency says they're devastated by his death and they're now urgently seeking more information about the attack. The strike also put 2 other journalists in hospital. One remains in a serious condition. And Italian lawyer Nancy Dell'Olio has paid tribute to her former partner, who she describes as her ex-husband, the former England manager Sven-Göran Eriksson, after he died at the age of 76. Nancy says, "I choose to remember the good times we shared and the moments that brought joy to our lives." The Swedish national became the first ever foreign manager of the England men's football team in 2001. Sven also managed a series of high-profile clubs, including Manchester City, Benfica, Roma and Fiorentina. Eriksson had pancreatic cancer and at the beginning of 2024 revealed he only had a year to live at best. His former England captain David Beckham posted an emotional tribute on social media saying, "We laughed, we cried and we knew we were saying goodbye. Sven, thank you for always being the person you've always been, passionate, caring, calm and a true gentleman. Thank you, Sven, and in your last words to me, it will be okay." The Prime Minister has said he'll be remembered for his tremendous contribution to English football, which brought joy to so many over the years. And FA President Prince William's also paid respects on X, saying, "I met him several times and was always struck by his charisma and passion for the game." Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Some of you may recall this document. A solemn-looking Sir Keir Starmer with his sleeves rolled up, more on the sartorial point in a moment, issued the Labour Party manifesto back in June promising the British people change. One of the key promises in this document was a shift in standards. The document reads, "Over the last 14 years, trust in politics has been shattered, partying in Downing Street whilst the whole country has sacrificed their freedom, handing lucrative COVID contracts to friends and donors, failing to expel MPs caught breaking the rules. The behaviour of the Conservatives has understandably led to a widespread belief that many politicians are in it for themselves." Sir Keir Starmer, the Holy One, is expected to make a speech tomorrow in which he will say he needs 10 years to turn the country round. But within just 50 days, he has already found himself sinking in a slough of his own sleaze as cronyism, Donergate erupts. The most serious case appears to be that of Ian Caulfield, a former banker and business advisor to the Labour Party, who was given a paid by you, ladies and gentlemen, civil service post in the Treasury, a role that is meant to be politically impartial. It later emerged he donated £20,000 to Labour MPs, including £5,000 to Rachel Reeves, who happens to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with reports suggesting she did not declare this to the Treasury Permanent Secretary within 14 days of appointment. An investigation is needed, because if this were the case, it would be a breach of the Ministerial Code. The independent advisor on ministerial interests, Sir Laurie Magnus, ought to ask the Prime Minister to approve such an inquiry. Indeed, what's actually happened to Starmer's Ethics and Integrity Commission, which he promised to set up, because it was going to be able to start independent inquiries independently without prime ministerial authorisation. But the Prime Minister, if he were so anti-sleaze and so holy as he pretends to be, could actually give this authority to Sir Laurie today to decide whether or not to investigate the Chancellor. It seems to me that he definitely should. But the sleaze, alas, does not end there. The Sunday Times revealed Lord Ali, another Labour Party donor, has been given a number 10 pass, which is unusual for anyone other than civil servants, politicians, political advisers. But he did donate £10,000 to Sue Gray's son's campaign, but the hero gave £16,000 to pay for the now Prime Minister's clothing for his makeover. Here's what Sir Keir Starmer was wearing before the donation. And here's what he's wearing after the donation. Isn't it an amazing transformation? Don't you see the personification of beauty now standing before you? Doesn't that impress you? And don't you think that for £16,000, perhaps the Prime Minister could have done a little bit better? He could have gone for the Liberace look. I think that would have been appealing, with some of those fine Dame Edna glasses. Or even, yes, with that much money, he could have found himself a double-breasted suit, a tie and a pair of Oxfords. But sartorial advice to one side, it's the hypocrisy that stinks. The Labour Party spent years engaging in the utmost sanctimony. It attacked the Tory party for its supposed cronyism at every turn. It virtue signalled, and Sir Keir Starmer even came up with the platitude, we are returning politics to public service. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has been throwing stones in the glass house of number 10 Downing Street, and he really ought to be careful that this cronyism scandal doesn't shatter the centre of power before his very eyes. As ever, let me know what you think about humbugs at mailmog@gbnews.com. With me now is my panel, historian David Oldroyd-Bolt and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Now, I'm going to come to you first, Amy, because you're on the left and you're not unsympathetic to Sir Keir Starmer. But he's a silly old goose, isn't he? That if you prance around pretending that you're very holy, you can't afford in your first weeks of office to have your Chancellor, who may have broken the rules, and to be giving money by your mates and then giving them a pass.
I think it's really difficult because with the case of Lord Ali, he is a donor, but then he's also a Labour peer. And we don't actually know at this point what this temporary pass was actually for. So for all we know, maybe they're planning us a surprise one-off bonus donation to all households. Fingers crossed. Maybe he's setting up Big Brother again in, the Big Breakfast in number 10. I mean, we don't know. He's a TV executive. But my point is that it's difficult to know. It's a bit of a revolving door. What came first, the expertise or the donation? And as long as you have political donations, you're going to have this problem. So my point is you shouldn't really have these big donors.
That's fair enough.
That's where the problem is.
But what I'm concerned about is not so much the pass as the hypocrisy. That Keir Starmer, whenever anybody gave any money to Boris, said, oh, they're onto something, they want something in return. And you can't do that if you're taking money yourself.
But again, this whole thing comes back to taking money, because whenever you give money, what do you expect in return? People will always see influence, they will see some sort of contractual, reciprocal situation when it comes to money. However, with the political system how it is, if Labour didn't take donations, and the Conservative Party still did, then it wouldn't be able to compete at all. So it's a problem with donations.
And do you think the £16,000 has been well spent on making him look really beautiful?
Absolutely not.
You don't? He doesn't?
I think it's outrageous.
Right, OK, so Amy doesn't think he's beautiful.
He could have paid a stylist for half that and looked half decent.
But, David, the gold standard is Stuart Wheeler, who gave £5 million to the Conservative Party and would not accept anything in return. He didn't want an honour, he didn't want access, he just believed in public service. Amy's got a point, though, that is quite rare.
It is. But I would say to Amy, there are two things you have to bear in mind. One is, do you wish the state to fund political parties and activity as happens in other countries? Well, that would be brilliant, but given the dwindling nature of political membership in this country, that would mean that, in fact, the Labour Party, with its union backing, was given far more money, and the Conservative Party would go away, which I don't think is particularly good for democracy. We have to ask, do we want to return to a standard that existed under, say, Lloyd George, where people bought titles and honours in order to give to the political system and get something back? Or do we want to set a much more stringent standard? Jacob's instance of Stuart Wheeler is, I think, a perfectly good one, where you do this almost with an understanding that you will get nothing. You are doing this because you believe in the philosophical and principled mission of those political parties. I should hope that would be the case. That the Labour Party has been hoisted by its own petard so soon into government is, I think, a great shame for Labour members who expected more, and the country that has a right to be given more by its political representatives.
But isn't the Rachel Reeves thing actually more serious? And Sir Laurie Magnus must be feeling a bit of a muppet at the moment, because there he is as the Prime Minister's ethics advisor. The Prime Minister said he's going to be given this extra authority in this Ethics and Integrity Commission. But he's left swinging in the wind, isn't he? He isn't able to instigate an investigation. This chap got offered a job, which I think has now been rescinded. The Civil Service Commission didn't get the full information because apparently Rachel Reeves hadn't filled out her declaration of interest, so didn't know that this £5,000 had been donated to her. That really ought to be looked into, and Magnus ought to be making a bit of a fuss.
I think Mr Caulfield has now said he will work as an unpaid advisor to the Treasury, which should have been the case in the first instance. Sir Laurie Magnus must be feeling slightly silly on two counts. One is that this power that was promised has not materialised, and the other is that the civil servant with whom he worked closest, Sue Gray, is now in number 10, and it is indeed her son who received the money from Lord Ali, personally, £10,000 to Beckenham and Penge Labour constituency party, which is said to have resulted in his being given a pass. Now, the only thing we know that Lord Ali has subsequently done with that pass was to organise a party in the garden at number 10.
For who?
For Labour Party staffers. Why he needed a pass to do that has yet to be explained, and why Sue Gray was able to make such a seamless transition between the supposedly impartial civil service and the highly politicised role she now occupies in number 10 is, I think, still a matter for some public investigation.
And the pass at number 10 is quite interesting because if you're going in for a particular event, it's very straightforward to get in. Your name is on the list, you show some photographic identity to the police on duty, and you get let in. A pass isn't essential if you're just doing one event there.
But he is a parliamentarian.
Yeah, but parliamentarians don't automatically get passes to number 10. I only had a pass to number 10 when I was a minister.
Is this the most pressing issue? I mean, this was on the front page of the newspapers this morning. And
yes, because it's sleaze.
Is it sleaze? It's not exactly Matt Hancock giving a multi-million-pound contract in the pub, is it? It's just we need transparency, I agree, but let's wait for the explanation.
But this man said he's whiter than white, and it turns out that he's not.
I think we're scratching around for dirt here because with the Rachel Reeves example, it was £20,000 over 10 years. That could equate to about £200 a month.
Well, it's £5,000 to her.
It's not massive amounts of money, is what I'm saying. And this is my point. When you have amounts of money and expertise, it makes it very unclear whether those people are being employed because of their expertise or because of their money. Let's take the example of Richard Sharp, the BBC. Do you remember he gave £600,000 a donation to the Conservative Party and suddenly became the chairman of the BBC? I think that one was a lot more clear because he didn't have the expertise. He only had the money.
This is where I think you're wrong. Richard Sharp, exceptionally good businessman. I happen to have met him over the years. Formidable intellect, very capable man. BBC, a very complex business to be chairman of. He was an immensely qualified person, and he happened to be a Conservative. He was punished for being a Conservative and giving with no expectation of return.
But then I would say you're making my point in a way, because you're agreeing. There is a grey area. It is hard to see whether it's the donation or the expertise.
Successful as Richard takes on that type of public service job because they want the job. They do it as a service. It's a ghastly job, the chairmanship of the BBC. Nobody in their right mind. My father tried to
But may I intervene? I don't think that the money, the amount, is material. It's the principle. And the fish rots from the head down is, I think, a truism in politics. For it to have happened so quickly that the Labour Party should have allowed its principles to slip, I think should give us all cause for worry, because this is a month and a half into a government that could, as Keir Starmer has suggested today, last for 10 years. Imagine the state of their principles after a decade, if this is how they are after a month and a half. The money in its amount is irrelevant. It is the question of the principle that's at issue. And that principle seems to have been broken with remarkable ease and alacrity.
But is it not hypocrisy that you can defend Richard Sharp, but then you can't see
Ian
McCormick?
The issue here is that the Labour Party set this standard. I was very happy with Richard Sharp, but it was the Labour Party who hounded him from office. They're the ones who can't have it both ways. They hounded a decent man from office, and now they're doing worse. This seems to me to be ridiculous. As it happens, I think British politics is some of the most honest politics in the world. But that the Labour Party has made a profession of saying we're very holy. And then it turns out They're for sale to their mates for a few quid.
But we're ultimately in agreement that money makes things complicated and we'd probably be better off without these massive donations.
Well, no, because then we'd have to have it funded by the state.
The water wouldn't be muddied, would it? Then Mr Sharp's expertise wouldn't be
I don't want to put a single extra pound of burden on the hard-pressed British taxpayer.
Not necessarily, though, because we could have a capped system and the members pay.
Well, why on earth should the British taxpayer pay for politics, which it has little interest in at the best of times?
Why do you have so little faith in the party members?
Oh, well, that would be a great thing if party members actually had faith, but at the moment they have little reason.
If they've got good ideas, they don't need all those millions.
Well, I think that's a good point on which to end. Thank you very much, my panel. What are our supposedly underfunded social services doing, molesting Kirsty Allsop after she allowed her 50-year-old son to go interrailing?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
The Northern Opera Group performs rare and wonderful operas in imaginative ways, enabling audiences and artists to discover new works and composers from across opera's history. The group produces the annual Leeds Opera Festival, which combines new productions of rare operas with a wide range of talks, panel discussions, workshops and other events. 2024 marks the festival's 8th season, and it's set to offer the world a premiere of Northern Opera Group's latest commission, Sherlock Holmes and the Sign of Fall, an interpretation of the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle 19th century mystery novel. It's the first ever opera adaptation of the enigmatic detective. The artistic director of the Northern Opera Group, David Ward, joins me now to tell us more. David, welcome to GB News. If this is the first time that Sherlock Holmes has been translated into opera, I'm imagining that may mean that it's quite difficult to do. Is that so?
It's certainly a creative challenge, yes, and we knew that when we started on the project. I mean, as you'll know, opera traditionally has been slower-paced stories, ones that relied on less kind of narrative drive and action. So our first challenge was actually how do we translate this kind of story into opera? So it's about looking at that musical language we use, the theatrical language, and I very much hope that we have been able to find a solution to do that. Well, it first started in 2020 when we all had a lot of time on our hands, and I finally picked up the Sherlock Holmes novels to have a read. And as I was reading them, it just struck me that these could make a fantastic opera, as well as those great theatrical set pieces. You know, you've also got a wonderful kind of cast of characters that you could have on stage. I also got really interested in this idea of how do you use music to show Sherlock's internal world.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about Sleaze and Starmer, and the mailmog's been coming in. Hugh says, hello, Jacob. Surely a donation is given with no expectation of a benefit coming the other way. And Robert says, dear Jacob, when Starmer was in opposition, he was pious and indignant as he accused Boris Johnson of being a liar. It is distasteful, to say the least, to see him and his acolytes now lying through their teeth at every turn. They've only been in power for a few weeks, and they're already discredited. Yes, that's rather my view. And Cameron, oh, thank you, Cameron. Loving the new tie, Jacob. Where did you get it from? It suits you very well. Well, the truth is, earlier on today, I was at Blagdon for the President's Day, where the parents were playing the children. And so I wore my cricket tie, which I've had for many years, and I even bowled an over, as I'm currently dressed pretty much. I did take my coat off at Sixtus and Thomas, who scored massively off my over, as you would expect. Is there any sane person who doesn't think it was absurd of the supposedly hard-pressed social services to investigate Kirsty Allsop. The TV presenter was quizzed by social services for allowing her 15-year-old son to get interrailing across Europe. The social worker wanted to know what safeguards had been put in place when allowing her teenager to travel for 3 weeks. Ms. Allsop called the questioning Orwellian and absolutely outrageous, and I happen to agree with her completely. However, my next guest, who is perfectly sane, doesn't. I'm joined now by entrepreneur and actress Amy Ansell. Amy, thank you so much for coming on. It is difficult because children develop at different ages. But her boy is 15, I think may even have turned 16 by now. Social services have a lot to do. Were they really right to pick up the fag end of gossip in a newspaper and track down Kirsty Allsop?
Absolutely. I think they were just doing their job. They have a duty of care. I think 15 years old is way too young to be on their own. And it's not necessarily the child or the teenager is not ready, but it's also the other people that might be dangerous for them to come across. They could be trafficked, or they could be, there's so much that could go wrong with a 15-year-old and his 16-year-old friend traveling throughout Europe for 3 weeks on their own, unsupervised. And it's just, I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's irresponsible and bad parenting.
But they have telecommunications, they can keep in touch, they know the number of the emergency services.
But do they in all the countries they go to?
Yeah, but mobile telephony works across Europe.
And what if their phone's stolen?
Well, but what if this happens?
Anything can go wrong.
What happens if you're 53 and you're run over by a bus? There are always risks, and life is about taking risks, and parents allow their children to take gradated risks as they get older. And some children are ready to do things. I mean, I would have had complete confidence in my current 15-year-old and now 16-year-old doing this. They're highly competent children. They would have been able to do it.
But like I say, maybe your children would be in that position. But I don't think a 15-year-old nowadays would necessarily have the wherewithal to really navigate throughout Europe and understand what to do, where to go, and how to get around necessarily.
Isn't this parental choice from an earlier stage? That if you wrap your children in cotton wool from the day they're born, then when they're 15, when they're 25, they're still incapable of doing anything. And you need to allow them to be incrementally independent. So to go on a British train by themselves when they're 10 or 11, then to do a continental train at 15, to do the occasional international flight unaccompanied. All these things show them growing confidence and spirit.
Correct. And I am not a helicopter parent myself. However, I think there is a safer solution to what Kirsty did. I think the parents could have gone. She could have gone with them. And then while they were in these European countries, she could have let them have the freedom that they wanted, a day here, 2 days there. Because if there was an accident, if there was a big problem, she's not thousands of miles away. She's, a few miles away, and she can help handle this. This is when they're 15, of course. Maybe when they're 17, 18, things will be different.
But whose choice is this? You see, I think there is a battle over children between the state and parents, and that the state wants to control everything. But I think parents know best. And I think parents are entitled to allow their children to take risks, and the state has no business interfering.
Parents should know best, and you're giving parents a lot by saying they know best. I've met many parents who don't know best, and I'm sad about that, but I see it myself with my son's friends' parents.
But aren't they just as likely to make mistakes as the state? And therefore, if a mistake is to be made, better it should be made by a parent than by the state. Heavy hand of the state has no business interfering in a 15-year-old travelling. It's not a 5-year-old being abused. That's where social services should be concentrating their support. The children who aren't in school, the children who since COVID have never returned, not the child of a celebrity where they picked up gossip in the papers. It's just headline chasing.
Well, we don't know how she was reported. Maybe someone that was worried about her son and the well-being of her son did report her. We don't really know as far as
I mean, there are some frightful busybodies in this country.
Right, correct.
Who should mind their own business. But social services should recognise that.
Correct. However, if they're informed, they're doing their job, and it's a duty of care. And I think they did the right thing by at least looking into it. And it's become a big news story, obviously. And maybe that's good. Maybe now we can question, is that the right thing to do? And parents think twice. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. So I think it's really great that it became a big news piece.
I actually hope parents will think the other way and think we can allow our children to do more, because I certainly think that my children have been allowed to do less than I was allowed to do, and I did less than my father's generation did.
Well, it's a different world. We live in a different world. And I was very surprised by Kirsty's statement. She said, I hope the silver lining to this cloud is that everyone stops and thinks about the freedom we had as children and asks what harm could be done, not by the freedoms, but by the restrictions and fears we are imposing on our kids. And that says everything we need to know. Ultimately, she's not afraid of the big bad world, and she doesn't want her son to be afraid of the big bad world. But I think there's a lot to be afraid of. It's not about restrictions or fears. It's about being vigilant. And I think by allowing her child, who's 15 years old, to go and do this, she's teaching him not to be vigilant. And, oh, well, if something happens, you'll deal with it.
I think fear not, and he'll be all the more competent for it. I also think the busybody who reported them really ought to go and boil his or her head. Anyway, thank you, Amy. In a moment, with help from Labour's New Socialists' Gender in Schools, I'll be attempting to explain how to disrupt the centrality of whiteness. Plus, the peaking panderers in the Labour Party are under the political microscope.
Hello there, welcome to your latest weather forecast for GB News from the Met Office. Northwest, southeast split developing with our weather. Wet and windy weather pushing in from the Atlantic across the north and the west, but turning quite warm as high pressure holds on across southeastern parts of the UK. And you can see this weather front moving in through Monday evening, overnight into Tuesday, bringing some wet and windy weather. In fact, cloud and rain increasing already across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland pushing north and eastwards. The rain turning particularly heavy as we head into the early hours, and Met Office warning across southwest Scotland for some heavy bursts of rain, some travel disruption first thing Tuesday morning. Elsewhere, generally dry with some clear spells, winds coming up from the south, so no problems with temperatures. So wet start across Scotland on Tuesday morning, outbreaks of heavy rain in places. There'll be some tricky travelling conditions, some brisk winds around the coast and over the hills as well, temperatures around the mid-teens. Cloudy and wet across parts of Northern Ireland as well, but the heaviest of the rain here starting to clear. Heavy rain across Cumbria through the morning, brighter further south and east. Wales generally dry, but rain soon approaching from the west, and the rest of England dry and bright to start Tuesday morning with some hazy sunshine. Through the day, this weather front only slowly pushes a little further south and eastward, so rain continuing across southern Scotland, northern England, pushing into parts of Wales and perhaps the West Country at times too. Bright skies following behind across Northern Ireland, Scotland, fresh here. Ahead of it though, dry, warm and sunny, temperatures reaching around 25, 26 Celsius. On Wednesday, this weather front still across central and western parts of England and Wales, though starting to fizzle out. Warm and sunny ahead of this, further showers and rain pushing across Northern Ireland and Scotland, rather fresh here. And temperatures in that sunshine in the southeast reaching around 28, 29 Celsius. Settling down by the end of the week, temperatures a little lower. See you soon.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about Kirsty Allsop and your views coming in, and they contradict each other, actually. It's interesting. Valerie, good evening, Jacob. These boys were obviously capable of doing this trip because they both came back in one piece and in good spirits. This lady's children may well be too immature to go anywhere. This doesn't mean everyone's children are the same. Only the parents can know. I agree, parental responsibility. Don't hand things over to the state. But Jack makes perhaps a fair point. Social services would have been castigated had they not investigated. 18-year-olds and above are vulnerable but can be legally responsible for their own decisions. Non-adults cannot. It's a debate of great interest, but I would rather trust a parent than the state. How can a skin colour be challenged? Well, teachers will soon find out as new guidance has been created for teacher training courses to disrupt the centrality of whiteness in schools in a move to make Britain's schools anti-racist. Teachers, if they're white, will need to develop and present a positive white racial identity. This guidance is full of highly academic but slightly confusing terminology, with the term whiteness mentioned over 120 times. It must be sponsored by Dulux. The guidance doesn't stop at challenging colour. It also suggests that emotions themselves can be racialised, implying that whiteness comes hand in hand with a right to enjoyment. Well, you've followed all that. With me now is my panel, Fellow of the Danube Institute, David Oldroyd-Bolt, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole-Turner. David, I can't think they pay much attention to this in Hungary, where the Danube Institute has its base.
Thankfully, they're not a racist government, so they don't think that measures like this have anything to do with running education policy. I struggle to find any way in which it is not a racist policy. Anything that separates one race from another in characteristic, in emotion and in experience of the world is, I think, de facto racist. And this is saying that there is something inherently sinful and wrong about being white that must be addressed by people who happen to be white. If the boot were on the other foot, if you were saying this about people who were black or of Asian extraction, it would clearly and obviously be castigated. And it should be in this instance.
Amy, how can I challenge my whiteness? What on earth does it mean?
OK, so I think this recommendation came from a bit of research done by the Runnymede Trust, which is a think tank.
Oh, Pinko think tank, yes. There's a bunch of hard lefties.
It was a report called Racism in Secondary Schools, and it was based on the first-hand experiences of students and teachers, and found there is significant racism within secondary schools. So it made some recommendations which included this talk about whiteness, which was to lend itself to improve standards in schools by attending to the racism that is within schools because of a result of teachers being overwhelmingly white.
OK, but what do they mean when they say you should adopt a positive white racial identity? What's that mean? Well, sounds like racial superiority. That sounds a dreadful idea.
I haven't done the training, so it sounds a little bit confusing. But when I looked into how it would pan out, it was a lot less confusing, and it basically looks to a post-racial teaching environment where there won't be racism in schools, because at the moment we do have incidences of school policies that are inherently racist, from hairstyles to behavioural. Like, children who are black are more likely to be suspended, they're more likely to be in trouble, and that needs seeing to. So that's what this is about, really.
There are two different things. One is there is a problem of racism, and that should always be tackled, and that racism is a bad thing, unquestionably. But there is also this little industry of fraudsters who use impenetrable language and make things up, and people give them public money to talk absolute rot. So you have to question meritocracy and objectivity. Objectivity is surely a good thing in terms of race.
But we know what that
means. You
have
to adopt a positive white racial identity and challenge whiteness, disrupt the centrality of whiteness. This doesn't mean anything. They get paid to use language that is devoid of meaning.
It doesn't. It means incorporating the history of white supremacy, colonialism, slavery.
Colonialism is not about white supremacy.
Which brings us to where we are today.
Colonialism is so much more complex than that. The Greeks had colonies in Rome. Naples is the new city.
Spain was a colony of the Moorish for 300, 400 years. Are we suggesting that the Arab slave industry still has an impact on it today?
What about the Ottoman Empire?
But are you suggesting that colonialism and slavery doesn't impact the way we have racial inequality today?
I'm certainly suggesting that because I think it's been vastly overdone by a grifting industry that knows that the historical comparisons are inapt.
But do you agree, Dave, these people are basically charlatans?
Yes, I think they know very little of history. What they do know of history, they amplify beyond its context. They take a great deal of their narrative from American racial history, which is vastly different from our own. Never is, for instance, the role of the West Africa Squadron in abolishing slavery, the slave trade across the world, ever emphasised. It is only away the sin that came before it. It is grifting on the most appalling scale and using taxpayers' money to do so.
I think you're misrepresenting this quite heavily.
The problem here is that it suggests that there is something inherently racist about every white teacher in the country. I think that is absolutely wrong, and I think it's a calumny
well, it is
against those teachers.
On this occasion, I'm giving David the last word, because, Amy, I do normally give you the last word. So is Labour getting a little bit too close with China? It turns out that the shelving of the Tory free speech law in universities is in part because of Labour's determination to protect their operations in the Kenyan state. The law, which was designed to protect students, academics and guest speakers, was axed, reportedly owing to concerns about international students and overseas campuses. Although this has been denied, it's clear the legislation would have irked any totalitarian state. I'm joined now by a friend of the programme, the director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, and my panel's still here too. Toby, what have you heard about the motivation for doing this? Is it a financial one, that they want to get the money of dictatorships, and dictatorships don't like free speech?
Well, the government have not been, initially at any rate, transparent about why they've torpedoed the Freedom of Speech Act. The Free Speech Union, as I came on here to tell you about, is legally challenging the government's decision to torpedo the Act, and they've now responded to our pre-action protocol letter. And in that letter, they've said one of our reasons for pausing the Act, they claim they've only paused it, they want to consider it in more detail. One of their reasons for pausing it is because universities have said to them that if you pass this Act, it could jeopardise the funding we're currently getting from the People's Republic of China and other authoritarian regimes around the world. And the reason they've said that, I think, is for various reasons. One is there's a transparency clause that was due to be commenced, but the government have paused. The transparency clause would have forced universities in England to disclose where their funding's coming from. If it's coming from places like China, they don't want to disclose
Because this is really important, isn't it? Because Charles Moore has written about his Cambridge College, which has received a lot of money from China and spends its whole time saying how marvellous China is.
Yes. I think universities would be embarrassed because people would cross-reference the money they're getting from China with the nice things they've said about the Chinese regime. They're also worried about overseas campuses. So Nottingham, for instance, has a campus in the People's Republic of China. And we know that the Russell Group, of which Nottingham University is a member, approached the government. They've published the document in which they said, we're concerned that these new free speech obligations might apply to our overseas campuses, and that might jeopardise their longevity in those countries that won't want free speech to apply on those campuses.
But that is a perfectly reasonable point, isn't it? That as a general tradition, the UK doesn't pass extraterritorial legislation, so we don't expect to legislate for free speech in China. That's a matter for the Chinese.
Yes, but I think it's not unreasonable for universities that are branded English universities and are offering an English education to people in China, that in those universities our traditions of academic freedom and free speech should be upheld. But the universities don't want to do that. The other concern they had, Jacob, was that many of their students now, there are 15,000 students at UCL, for instance, from China. Many of their students are on bursaries from countries like China, and as a condition of being given those bursaries, the students have to swear allegiance to the regimes. So that might be contrary to this new duty universities have to uphold free speech, so it might jeopardise those bursaries and those students that they're increasingly dependent on.
Do you think it is contrary to the provisions of the Act to swear an oath of fealty to your nation before taking up a place at university in England? Well, is it your understanding of how the Act works? Because that's quite important.
Well, yeah, in the draft guidance produced by the Office for Students explaining how the new complaint scheme, which has been torpedoed by the government, would work, it actually gives an example of a Chinese student on a bursary from China, he should be able to speak freely and criticise the regime that's funding him. He shouldn't be constrained by some kind of loyalty oath to the regime. Clearly, the government doesn't want to give universities any more money. It doesn't want to give them the ability to raise tuition fees. So it's thrown them this sop, as it were. It said, we won't pass this Act if you really think it's going to jeopardise your financial relationship with these authoritarian regimes. If you want to put profit before principle, we'll let you do that.
Is this another bit of sleaze, Amy? It's the sort of kowtow being carried out to various dictatorships. It's the sort of Tony Blair approach to running an institute. Find the dictatorships get their money
I'm not
and
sure.
give them what they want.
I don't agree it's a bit of sleaze. I think it's a bit of nonsense, though, because if it were the case, then where has freedom of speech written into its constitution in the US? The US has thousands of Chinese students. So I think if this were the case, Chinese students would be attending university in the US.
Well, the US has, obviously, the First Amendment.
Exactly.
David...
and there's lots of Chinese students in the US.
I mean, I don't know how interested you are in this subject, though I know you're a defender of freedom of speech.
Well, indeed, I was happy to be one of the first members of the Free Speech Union. It's one of the most fundamental questions facing us in the West today, to what degree we have freedom of speech and to what degree that's protected by law.
Human rights.
And I rather believe that those students attending British badged universities abroad should have exactly the same rights to freedom of speech and expression as though they were attending those institutions here.
Do you? So you believe in extraterritorial legislation?
Well, I believe in institutions that are fundamentally British, applying British standards wherever they are in the world, regardless of that territory, as was always the best tradition of the British Foreign Service and of army regiments and other institutions that went out into the empire.
But that should be up to them rather than legislated for, shouldn't it?
Well, it should, but can we really rely these days on their having the moral fortitude to stand up for that in the face of loss of funding? And I think this is where Toby makes an excellent point. And I think I would go further and say that this is just another instance of where we really need to look at the validity of so many universities and their courses now if they are to continue being funded by government.
Yeah, but UCL and... what college was Charles Moore at?
Well, he was at Trinity, but he's talking about Jesus.
He was at Trinity. Jesus College. I mean, they are fine institutions. They're not institutions doing Mickey Mouse degrees.
Yes, but Jesus College, as we know from the work that Charles and others have done, has consistently now ignored questions about Chinese human rights in order to continue receiving the money. There have been demonstrations at Cambridge and at London universities of Chinese students saying you must not criticise China towards
Amy,
other
let me
Chinese
give Amy
students.
10 seconds on rebuttal on why you think this law should be got rid of.
Because hate speech isn't free speech.
Hate speech isn't speech. Hate speech isn't free speech. That will be
hate speech.
In the,
that's a red herring.
Good. OK. Well, it was a red. Toby's interrupted and got the last word in the end. In a moment, I'll be joined by one of the UK's top royal journalists, as one of the nation's favourite members of the royal family celebrates his 80th birthday.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales could be back to full duties by the autumn. This would be wonderful news.
Well, I actually don't think she is going to be back to full-time duties by the autumn. I think that's how I read it. But in fact, I think what they were saying, this is a report by the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, is that Catherine is still recovering and she's still having treatment, but she doubts whether she'll be back to full-time duties, but we will be seeing her. So we will be, seeing her at big royal events, and she'll, if she's up to it, she will, appear now and then, but most of her work will be done from home because she's still having the cancer treatment. And as she said way back in the summer, she has good days and she has bad days.
Yeah, and we can all understand that, can't we? But it does make such a difference, doesn't it, to catch glimpses of her and seeing her and William this week congratulating the GB athletes after the success at the Olympics. It really does make all the difference just to see her, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I think, she wants to get out there, but I don't think she's going to be back at the daily chore of royal duties, visiting hospitals, things like that. I don't think she'd be strong enough to do that. But, she looks terrific. We know she's had a brutal year, in fact, probably much, much worse than any of us can imagine. And so she's, doing what her doctors are telling her. She's taking it very gently. I'm sure she wants to go full steam ahead, but she is being restrained, as it were.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, wishing many happy returns of the day to His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester, who is 80. He is one of the most effective yet understated members of the royal family. Like his late uncle, King George VI, he was a spare who inherited the main title and has faithfully done his duty as an indispensable cornerstone of the crown. He has many roles, representing the royal family at functions, associated with over 150 charities and organisations. He's the royal family's trustee of the British Museum. He's considered by many to be part of the glue that holds the royal family together. I'm joined now by Robert Hardman, royal journalist and author of Charles III, New King, New Court, The Inside Story, to discuss the Duke. It is rather marvellous, isn't it, that there are these two grandsons of George V, both in their 80s, who do between them over 300 engagements every year and bring amazing pleasure to people. People feel touched by monarchy.
Yeah, I know. You're absolutely right, Jacob. I mean, you refer there to both the Duke of Gloucester, who's 80 today, and the Duke of Kent, his cousin. And let's not forget the Duchess of Gloucester as well, who's another stalwart, and indeed Princess Alexandra, the Duke of Kent's sister. You know, they are... there's this phrase which I tend not to use about the minor royals, as they're often described, because, I mean, if you're one of those charities that are very glad to have them, there's nothing minor about it at all. And you can't spread the monarchy all over the country just through the monarch and through as it were, the front line. You know, every day there are parts of the country and small organisations up and down that need to be sort of given a pat on the back and a thank you and recognised. And you know that's the sort of thing that the Duke of Gloucester has been doing for years, and he's very good at it, and he does it with a sense of humour. And as you say, he wasn't originally destined for this at all. It was going to be his elder brother, Prince William, who then tragically died in a plane crash in 1972. And so suddenly this fairly earnest, serious trainee architect, Prince Richard, suddenly found himself in line for the dukedom. And when his father died, he became Duke of Gloucester. So instead of pursuing the career he'd always planned as an architect, and he really knew his stuff, he was a proper, qualified architect who'd been through Cambridge and through all the training for architecture, he became a regular member of the royal family, and he's been doing it ever since.
And there's something sort of ethereal about the magic of monarchy, that by virtue of being the grandson of a sovereign or the granddaughter of a sovereign, there is a feeling of being close to the crown, and therefore when Duke of Gloucester, Duke of York, etc., are at events, people feel they are next but one to the king, Duke of Kent, next but one to the king, and that this is really important to them and encourages them and makes them realise that they're part of the whole fabric of British society.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is that representative role that is very important. I mean, you see it at a further remove through the sort of network of things like Lord Lieutenants, who are the monarch's sort of representatives in the counties. But you're absolutely right. For the public, for organisations to have someone who is very much, that old phrase, of the blood royal. But I mean, yes, we're talking, grandsons of George V, who have been part of royal life for longer now than most people have been alive. I mean, Prince Richard, Duke of Gloucester, he went on behalf of the Queen to preside over independence ceremonies for places like St Vincent and the Grenadines and Vanuatu. I mean, when the King of Tonga died a few years ago, suddenly, a member of the royal family is needed to go and represent the then Queen, and off goes the Duke of Gloucester. And people are very glad to have someone who they come with that imprimatur, if you like, that authenticity. He takes these things very seriously. But he's completely, there's no sort of standing on ceremony.
But he's 80, and the Duke of York, I accidentally mentioned, and the Duke of Sussex are both out of it.
Yes.
that monarchy is getting very narrowly based. And how does that work if all the institutions that the Duke of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent have managed to keep going, have managed to encourage, have managed to hold receptions for, no longer have that royal link? Does that separate the monarchy? Does it isolate the monarchy in the next generation?
It's clearly a challenge. I mean, you can't just rustle up new recruits. You have to sort of cut your cloth. And so, yes, you're right. I mean, there will be a number of organisations that currently enjoy and are very proud of having a royal patron, and that will have to either be spread thinner, or they will just have to find alternative patrons until, you know, the royal family moves forward and on into another generation.
Is it a mix of the right age? That is to say, are there younger royals who are about to become mature enough that they can be more working royals? Now, I'm thinking obviously of the Duke of York's daughters and the Duke of Edinburgh's children. Is there a period in the next 10 years when there's more they can do because their lives are more settled and people will be more responsive to them?
I think the sort of golden rule with royal families is you go where you're invited. So rather than, I think, sort of say, right, well, we're going to now that, you know, maybe 10 years hence, when the people like the Duke of Gloucester perhaps retired or certainly are less active, you know, do you then sort of, as it were, insert younger members of the family into their patronages? I don't think you do. I think you wait for those organisations to ask, and some of them might very much welcome Princess Beatrice or Princess Eugenie. But I mean, they've lived largely private lives. They haven't been
trained for it.
Well, they haven't been part of the sort of official royal machinery for all those years. I mean, you know, the Duke of Gloucester has. I mean, this will be it's 50 years since he started public duties. So he's been doing it a long time. It will be a very, very hard act to follow.
Well, I hope he has a nice glass of champagne this evening. Thank you very much, Robert. Up next, it's Patrick Christys. Patrick, have you got some champagne on your programme this evening?
Unfortunately not, Jacob, but it'll be a rip-roaring affair nonetheless. Keir Starmer, the sleaze and cronyism row. Are Labour trying to cover it up? Has he got anything to hide? At Notting Hill Carnival, there's been firearms arrests now, knife crime, attacks on police officers. We would not tolerate this level of criminality at any other event, and yet we're told to celebrate it because it's all about diversity, aren't we? And should we only take female and child refugees? It's after that attack by the Syrian asylum seeker, and what's going on in Afghanistan with the Taliban now?
Well, that's all going to be extremely interesting. Thank you very much, Patrick. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. You'll be glad to know that at Blagdon, the children won healthily against the parents. And the weather forecast for Somerset tomorrow is coming up. It'll be wonderful.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest weather forecast for GB News from the Met Office. Northwest, southeast split developing with our weather. Wet and windy weather pushing in from the Atlantic across the north and the west, but turning quite warm as high pressure holds on across southeastern parts of the UK. And you can see this weather front moving in through Monday evening, overnight into Tuesday, bringing some wet and windy weather. In fact, cloud and rain increasing already across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland pushing north and eastwards. The rain turning particularly heavy as we head into the early hours, and Met Office warning across southwest Scotland for some heavy bursts of rain, some travel disruption first thing Tuesday morning. Elsewhere, generally dry with some clear spells, winds coming up from the south, so no problems with temperatures. So wet start across Scotland on Tuesday morning, outbreaks of heavy rain in places. There'll be some tricky travelling conditions, some brisk winds around the coast and over the hills as well, temperatures around the mid-teens. Cloudy and wet across parts of Northern Ireland as well, but the heaviest of the rain here starting to clear. Heavy rain across Cumbria through the morning, brighter further south and east. Wales generally dry, but rain soon approaching from the west, and the rest of England dry and bright to start Tuesday morning with some hazy sunshine. Through the day, this weather front only slowly pushes a little further south and eastward, so rain continuing across southern Scotland, northern England, pushing into parts of Wales and perhaps the West Country at times too. Brighter skies following behind across Northern Ireland, Scotland, fresh here. Ahead of it though, dry, warm and sunny. Temperatures reaching around 25, 26 Celsius. On Wednesday, this weather front still across central and western parts of England and Wales, though starting to fizzle out. Warm and sunny ahead of this. Further showers and rain pushing across Northern Ireland and Scotland, rather fresh here. And temperatures in that sunshine in the southeast reaching around 28, 29 Celsius. Settling down by the end of the week, temperatures a little lower. See you soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could win an incredible £30,000 in cash. And you could be getting that winning call from us to tell you that you're our next Great British Giveaway winner.
Oh, I can't believe this.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
That is absolutely fantastic.
We're over the moon.
I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh, you shocked me. I never won a penny in my life.
If I was there, I'd buy you a drink.
Get your entry in now for another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash. Text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christie's. Tonight.
Best man on the road! 1, 2, jump on!
Well, there's been firearms offences, stabbings, drugs, violence, assaults on police officers. Why do left-wing politicians lie to us about Notting Hill Carnival being a celebration of culture and diversity? Also,
to clean up politics. No more VIP fast lanes, no more kickbacks for colleagues, no more revolving doors between government and the companies they regulate. I will restore standards in public life with a total crackdown on cronyism.
oh, that's a shame because there's a huge scandal for Labour. Keir Starmer will surely have to resign if he's guilty of sleaze and cronyism. I'll have the latest. Plus, yet another refugee slaughters people in Europe. The Taliban bans women from speaking in public. Should we close the borders and only accept women and children? And
Refugees are welcome here. Refugees are welcome here.
In light of what we saw in Germany, I ask now if the Refugees Welcome Brigade should hang their heads in shame. Also, more madness as 3 men won the women's races. Are blokes cheating at your local park run? Plus,
we nearly missed our flight because we had all this, and it's this kind of segregation, and you feel like some kind of like Untermensch.
Lorraine Kelly there appearing to liken post-Brexit passport queues to being like a Jew in Nazi Germany. And
I totally botch it, but you know, that's the whole point. You live, you learn, you find your craft, you have fun.
Kirsty Allsop is reported to social services because she let her child travel alone. What has the world come to? On my panel tonight, it's Express columnist Carol Malone. We've also got ex-Labour Minister Bill Rammell and former Tory Minister Paul Scully. Oh yes, and what's going on here?
You're having a good time.
Yeah, I'm rocking, yeah. When I'm allowed to do the job, I think it's good, yeah, I'm happy. But when I'm not allowed to do the job, I'm not happy.
Get ready, Britain, here we go. Comrade Starmer's corruption, scandal and sleaze allegations. Next.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening. The top stories. The Metropolitan Police says a person has been stabbed at Notting Hill Carnival today, resulting in non-life-threatening injury.